Hello people, so this is a tutorial on how to sphericalize your Bennett Vector longboard truck. If you do slalom or LDP, this is an absolutely essential modification, and I probably don't need to tell you what the advantages are because I'm sure you've already heard, hence why you're watching this tutorial. But let me give you a quick overview anyway. Non-sphericalized truck. The hanger has lots and lots of sloppy movement. There is no smoothness to the movement, it's moving forwards and backwards, left and right. It's just crap, quite frankly. Whereas a sphericalized hanger, lovely, beautiful fluid movements, no sloppiness whatsoever, no moving forwards and backwards, none of that nonsense. The first time I ever installed one of these on my LDP board, the board felt like it just went on its own. It was an amazing difference. So I need to tell you at this stage, by the way, that there is no script to this clip. I did start doing one, but I got bored after about 2 minutes, so it's going to be done from the hip. And I do apologise if I start rambling or if I start repeating myself, which is no doubt going to happen. So, like I said, apologies in advance. As well as showing you how to install a spherical bearing, I'm also going to show you a few other modifications. I'm going to show you how to smooth the pivot. The problem with the Bennetts is that it's a cast truck, and although it's brilliant for LDP and for slalom, it's actually very poorly made. This one here, as an example, looks like it's been made by a drunk person. Lots of bumps, imperfections. It's even got a major flat spot there. And it even appears, now that I look at it real close up, it even appears to have a crack in it. Two, in fact. So we'll smooth one of these off. I'm also going to show you how to drill a hole in the pivot cup seat. Now the reason you need to do this is if you have a pivot cup like this one, this is a Delrin pivot cup, there's no way this is coming out without being destroyed. When I modified this truck, I forgot to drill a hole in there, so the only way I'm going to be able to remove this is by ripping it out with a pair of pliers. So the other advantage with having a hole in the back here is so that when you push in an especially hard pivot cup like a Delrin, then it expels all the air through the other side, and it makes it a lot easier to push in. And when you want to remove it eventually, you'll be able to put something through there, like a thin piece of metal or something, to pop out the Delrin pivot cup or whatever pivot cup you've got in there. And then I'm going to show you how to remove and replace the stock kingpin. Now, for some unfathomable reason, the stock kingpin has thread going down halfway. I don't know why this is, because you're never going to tighten the nut down halfway, so it's a stupid design again. And the other, what that's going to do, that's going to mash up your bushing. It's going to shred it very, very quickly because you're putting a lot of pressure on the front truck. The other thing is that I've heard they have a tendency to break. Again, no surprises there because you're pumping it really, really hard. So it's a good idea to replace the stock kingpin with an aircraft bolt. Being a component for aeroplanes, it's a lot stronger, and also it only has 1 inch of thread, which means that once you put your truck together, once you screw down the nut, not much of the bushing should be touching the actual thread, so it's going to prolong the life of your bushings. Not infinitely, but it's certainly going to make it better. And then I'm going to show you how to recess a bushing. Bushings, when you have a spherical bearing in your trucks, the bushing needs to sit flush against the body of the bearing. See, this one is sitting flush. There is no gap here. Now this is a non-recessed. This is just a stock Bennett bushing. It's not recessed. Now can you see what's happened there is that there's a big gap here. Big gap there. So when the spherical bearing moves, it's going to try and move the bushing as well. There's going to be resistant. The bushing is going to be resistant against the bearing. Whereas a recessed bushing, no gap, no resistance. Cool, huh? Let's show you the tools that you're going to need in order to do this job. Some kind of a rotary tool. This, I believe, is a carbon copy of a Dremel. All of the Dremel accessories fit this. It costs about 20 or 22 pounds on Amazon, and it comes with about 100 other bits and pieces. I have no idea what half of these are for. You've got some kind of grinding stones and buffers and God knows what. You're going to need a Dremel bit number 115. 2 in a pack, costs about £7.50 or £8. You can get them, they're readily available. I get these off eBay, £7.50. You're going to need some epoxy, JB Weld, and something to apply it with. This is just like a bit of a payment card or a credit card or whatever, just a bit of plastic, flat plastic basically. The thing I would say about JB Weld, the consistency is quite weird when it's cold, so put it in your pocket for about half an hour before you use it. Whilst you're grinding the actual hanger, then put it in your pocket, let it warm up a bit. And what I'm going to do on this occasion is, as well as using the flat plastic bit to spread the JB Weld, on the other side I'm going to try something new, which is to use a syringe, disposable syringe. See how that goes. Worth a shot. Oh, by the way, what I should have mentioned at the beginning is protection, eye protection. There's going to be lots and lots of aluminium flying off your hanger when you're grinding it, so not having some kind of eye protection is not an option. It ain't going to be pretty if you end up with bits of metal shards in your eye. And also I use ear defenders. You don't have to go as extreme as this. You can just use earplugs if you've got earplugs lying around. I just happen to have these in a workshop, so it's good to have, because when you're grinding the hanger, it makes a really horrible high-pitched noise. It gets to you eventually. You're also going to need, what are you going to need? To recess the bushing, you need a countersink. This is a 16mm countersink. And what I use, you can use the rotary tool if the countersink will fit in there, but I tend to use just like an old, handheld, battery-powered drill, electric screwdriver type thing. In order to get the hole in your pivot cup seat, again you can use the rotary tool, and you need I use a 1.5mm drill bit to get the hole. And optional, I got this very crudely made caliper made out of a compass and a bolt that I had lying around. And what I use when I'm grinding the bushing seat, I just sort of measure it to see how I'm doing, to make sure that I'm grinding away an even amount of the bushing seat. What you will find though, because they're cast trucks, you might find that on one side it looks even, but on the other side it doesn't. It's just a judgment call, really. I don't think it'll make that much difference to the performance. By the way, what I forgot to mention is that the first time I did this job, I used an ordinary metal file. Probably cost you about £1 or £2 in your off eBay or in your hardware store. And this is a good thing to do because you get the feel of the material, you get the feel of how hard the aluminium is, or how soft it is, should I say. The only thing I would say, if you're going to do it with a round file, is you need to get a vise to clamp this in, because it's just too tricky trying to hold this in your hand whilst you're grinding it. You might mess it up, you might take away too much. It's hard to apply even pressure when you're holding it in your hand and grinding it manually with a round file. To smooth the pivot, you're going to need some kind of sandpaper. So that's for this job here. Smooth the pivot, get rid of all these imperfections, different grades. You can use a file if you like. However, this one is actually so badly, this is so extreme, the imperfections are so extreme, I might actually use a file to get rid of the first bit, to get it sort of relatively round. But I'll be very, very careful because, like I've said, I think I've said this before, these are like butter, and that file will just go through it. So, you've got to be really, really careful if you're going to use a file. And then to get the pivot nice and shiny, some metal polish. And then the other good thing to have around when you're doing this is some cotton buds and a kitchen, like a kitchen roll. After all that rambling, we can finally begin. Although actually, a bit more rambling, I'm afraid. A couple of things that I need to tell you before you actually start this. First of all, when you're grinding, ensure to keep the pressure even as you're moving the grinder around. You have to keep the pressure even because this stuff, this metal that the track is made of, is like butter compared to the grinding bit. If you press too much in one spot, you will take away too much metal and you'll end up with a wonky hole. The idea is to remove just enough metal so that the spherical bearing fits in there without falling through. And the reason for that is so that when the hole is big enough, what we'll then do is apply a little bit of JB Weld in the hole, just into this bit here of the hole, and then let that set, because that way it's easier to then build up the JB Weld around the bearing than it would be if the bearing was relatively loose in there. There's a danger that you might knock it out and it's harder to kind of gauge the, how straight it is. Also, when you're grinding, if the grinder is spinning in the clockwise direction, when you're in there, grind in the anti-clockwise direction. The reason for that is because if you're grinding it in the same direction as which the grinder is spinning, it will try and spin around in there freely, and it's much harder to control in there. So you have to do it in the opposite direction to which the grinder is spinning. So now we can really start with the job. Now, do you remember what I said earlier on? Safety glasses. Well, I've got glasses and safety glasses. Alright, let's do this. Don't forget, even pressure. Move around evenly. Don't put too much pressure on one bit of the hole, and work it in the opposite direction to which the grinder is spinning. Alright. I forgot the ear protectors. When you get to this point, it's a bit of a drag, but you have to keep stopping and checking every couple of revolutions. This is almost ready to pop through. Almost, but not quite. There we go. Okay, now that's actually, it wants to fall through, you see. To actually fall through now. I mean, this is okay, this will work, but I don't really like this. It's a little bit too loose now, but it will do. Whoop. do. Once we put a bit of epoxy in there, you'll be fine. Job done. What we're left with is one knackered grinding bit, lots of metal shavings, one hole ready to be JB welded. However, what I forgot to do is put the JB weld in my pocket to warm it up, so I'm going to do that now and go and have a siesta or something. And for the slightly tricky part of the process is now where we get the bearing in the hole. We have to spread the JB weld just on the inside, like, can you see that? I don't know if you can see that. All we're doing is spreading it on the inside of the hole. You see that? Okay. Once you've got the JB weld in the hole, you've got to be careful not to get any in the bearing. You can't get any in this part of the bearing. JB weld sets like steel, and if you get that in there and don't clean it up immediately, then the bearing is screwed basically. And let's try and do this. I'm going to put my finger underneath here just to stop it from falling through, because the hole was a little bit too big for my liking. So let's try and get that in there. Now you've got to try and position it, try and get it perfectly centered. I just do this by sight, to be honest. I can't be bothered measuring it, you know, we're talking fractions of millimeters, and I just don't think it's necessary as long as it's centered. Okay, see, I've got a little bit of JB weld in the bearing there, and that's when the cotton buds come in useful. That looks okay to me, I think. That's good. Very happy with this. See that? So we're not looking to actually bulk up the part around the bearing, body of the bearing. We're just going to leave it like this overnight, because I think I've already mentioned it, if you try and bulk it up now, it's very likely that you'll knock it out of position. So we'll leave this overnight and see how it looks tomorrow. I forgot to mention, when you leave this, leave it upright like that. Then that way there's no chance of the bearing falling out or going out of place. "24 hours later, and this is what we've got. Quick word about JB Weld. The consistency of JB Weld when it's cold is quite weird. It doesn't seem to want to mix properly, and what I usually do with this, half an hour before I use it, I put it in my pocket, or in winter I'll put it on the radiator. That way you'll get the consistency nice, you'll mix nicer, and it'll be easier to use. Secondly, use a 50-50 mix. As far as I understand, you can use more hardener, and according to the instructions they say that you can use less hardener, but it then just takes longer to set. I've used this with less hardener before. I've got the mix wrong, I can't remember what I used it for, and it just never actually seemed to set. It was always sticky, and it's certainly not something that I want in my longboard truck. For part one of this job, we're going to use the flat piece of plastic, bit of the credit card or payment card, and for the other side we're going to use the syringe for the first time experiment. So let's see if I can do this. So all you're trying to do, the objective is to fill in this gap here. Make sure you have a cotton bud at the ready. Don't forget, you can't get any of this on the bearing. It's fine to get it on the body of the bearing. In fact, you have to get it on the body of the bearing. But if you get it inside the bearing, then you need to clean it up immediately. Don't worry too much if you get it. If it looks messy initially, we'll clean it up later. This bit here by the pivot is a little bit tricky, so see if we can drop it in there. Now let's clean it up a bit. And I think that's job done. That looks really nice actually. Nice and smooth. See that? Alright, so we got the syringe filled up. It was a little bit of a pain getting it into the syringe. Now this is the first time attempt at doing this, so let's see if this makes it easier. It seems to make it easier to get it in the bit by the axle, that's for sure. I'm liking a syringe. Can you see that I nearly got it in the bearing parts? Do you know what? I think that will do. So the syringe is a hit. I think that's job done. Sand that little bit off there later, and it's not a massive problem. And that is how you install a spherical bearing into a Bennett Vector longboard truck. Syringe. I forgot to mention, but I'll only be stating the obvious. You've got to leave this for 24 hours before you use it. I would actually leave it for longer, just in case. Let it set super hard. In order to be able to remove the kingpin relatively easily, although it's still not going to be easy, you should bake the base plate as in bake it in the oven at 200 degrees for about 15 or 20 minutes. Now I don't want to state the obvious, but before you stick this in the oven, you've got to remove the bushings and the pivot cup. Oven at 200 degrees. Let's pop this in and set the timer for about 20 minutes or so, 18 minutes, that'll do. The base plate is now baked. Now needless to say, this has just been baked at 200 degrees, so health and safety, be careful when handling hot metal. So let's see if we can get this. Now what you need to do, right, so what we need to do with this, we're going to get it outside with a hammer and basically bang the crap out of it. If you have a bigger hammer, it's probably going to be better, but this is sufficient. I've done quite a few with this crappy little hammer, so it should be fine. We're now outside and it's dark and it's raining, so let's try and get this done quickly. What I'm going to do, I'm going to position it over this crack here so that when a kingpin comes out, it'll fall in between the cracks and there won't be anything resisting against it. And then you just got to bang it until it comes out. Success, one crappy stock kingpin removed. Before we do any other work to this, we're going to let it cool. Making a hole in the pivot cup seat. So we've got a 1.5mm drill bit, and you've got to just get it right down the center. It's a very easy point of reference, and you've got to do this, it's got to be done, this job has got to be done before the kingpin is installed, because once the kingpin is in, you can't get through to the pivot cup seat. Alright, so try and get the angle correct. Let's see how that went. Yeah, that's okay. It's not perfect, but it will do. It would have been preferable to get it on that bit there, but I don't think it's going to make a slightest bit of difference, to be honest. Installing the aircraft bolt. We've got the JB Weld mixed up. For this part of the job, is just stick a bit of JB Weld on the bottom of the bolt. You don't need too much. That should do it. Alright. Stick it in. And then to get the bolt to stay in there, what I do is I use the old stock bushings. Stick it on there, stick it on there, and I've got an old worn kingpin bolt that I use for this job specifically. That's because the nylock in the nut, should I say, not the bolt, in the nut, the nylock is worn away, so it goes on easier. You don't need to do it too tight, I just do it finger tight. And that's how you install the aircraft bolt. Now we're going to recess a bushing. My bushings of choice are riptides. I've got so many riptide bushings, however all of these appear to have been recessed already. So what I've got here is some old venom bushings which I'm going to use to demonstrate how to do this. One old venom bushing at hand. Now a couple of health and safety pointers. First one, is worthwhile having some kind of an old glove to hold this, because the idea is to let the bushing spin in your fingers whilst you're recessing. That way you'll get a near enough perfect hole. However, this is a hard bushing, and it's very, very small. It's much smaller compared to the rip ties that I use for the Bennett Vectors. So it will get hot in your finger, and it actually spins easier when you've got the glove on. The other very important health and safety pointer is that polyurethane is poisonous. So when you're recessing, you'll get dusty. Make sure you have a hoover at hand and try not to breathe too much. Alright, let's see if we can get this. So hopefully you'll be able to see how this spins in my finger. See that? The recess should be about 15 millimeters across, then that will fit nicely over the spherical bearing. Let's just hoover this up quickly. Okay, let's see now how far we've got. So the idea is, I think I've mentioned this at the beginning, is for the bearing to be able to move around without disturbing the bushing, so that way you know that it's done. This one appears to be good. It's moving around without any wobbles, and the hole is not perfect, but the harder the bushing, the harder it is to get a perfect hole. This one is a little bit wobbly. Let me just see if I can find the rip ties. The thing with rip ties, the softer the bushing, the easier it is to get the hole perfectly round. Look at that. One perfect hole. Nice, huh? The final part of the process to pimping your Bennett Vector is smoothing the pivot. And for that purpose, we have some wet and dry sandpaper, grade 240, which is the roughest, 320, 400, 600, which is the smoothest, some water, as we're using wet and dry sandpaper. And to get the pivot nice and shiny at the end, we have some metal polish. However, this pivot is so badly cast that I'm actually going to use a file to get rid of the extreme imperfections. I can honestly say that I've never seen a pivot this bad. There's nothing smooth or round about this whatsoever. Just one word of extreme warning when you do this job: it's a very, very destructive process. If you file away too much bushing seat when you are grinding to make space for the spherical bearing, you can maybe find a workaround, bulk it up, leave it overnight, bulk it up a bit more, leave it overnight, and it might work. However, if you file away too much pivot, that's it, your hanger is screwed. So take take extreme care when you're filing. Keep checking it and take it easy. Don't file away too much, otherwise I'll feel bad, maybe. If you are using a file before you use the sandpaper, make sure you keep moving it around. Don't stay in one spot for too long. So in this example, I want to file away this bit here. So I'm going to keep moving the file around so as not to get any flat spots. Progress report. Progress report. Progress report. I think we're done with the filing. Now we're ready to hit it with sandpaper. Same thing, same process. Keep moving it around. Don't sand in one spot for too long. And this is where we're at after about 15 minutes with grit 240 wet and dry sandpaper. Still not perfect, but I think this will do. And this is after about 15 minutes of hacking away at this with grit 320 wet and dry sandpaper. After about 10 or 15 minutes with grit 400. And after 10 minutes with grit 600. That's ready for a polish now. It's looking nice. Finally, getting the pivot nice and shiny. And for that, we're going to use metal polish. Brand is Autosol. This one came from Halfords and it cost about 5 or 6 or 7 quid or something. It wasn't much. And metal polish complete. That is very shiny. Look at that. Well people, I think this is job done. We have one very nicely modified Bennett Vector longboard truck installed with an aircraft bolt, hole in a pivot cap seat, one very shiny pivot and a spherical bearing. With the spherical, the sides with where I used the flat piece of plastic came out really nicely. The other side where I used a syringe, which I hadn't done before, it's a little bit rough, but it's not a big issue. This will still work fine. But note to self, next time a syringe is used, remove some of the epoxy with a flat piece of plastic to get it flatter, like this side. Well, I hope that you found this clip useful. There is something really satisfying about modifying your own trucks, and it's going to be even more satisfying when you get this installed on your longboard, because that board is going to pump like a mother. So if you have any tips, any comments, nothing rude, put them at the bottom of the clip. And thank you for watching.